I'm really honored to be here with Bill, a dear friend. And Bill, we're going to knock it out of the park in the Q&A together. So I thought I'd share with you before I tell you anything else about the program, about what's happening right now online, purportedly from San Francisco, but it's from everywhere and nowhere. We're running class right now, and I just thought I'd show you this agenda so you can get a feel for what a typical weekend looks like. We have 4 weekends and 1 long retreat. Mary Casamano was with us, and she happens to have just gotten done with a talk right now. Bill and Brian were with us on Friday afternoon, and a lovely woman named Shirley Strong, who's doing cultural competencies and spearheading the convening of a person of color interest group. She did a brilliant talk on Friday. Chuck Raison spent 2 hours with us from USONA, speaking about what it's looking like for the future with the work that USONA is doing. Patricia James, a medicine woman, Cheyenne Pipe Carriers, spoke about cross-cultural methods of healing. And then the people who organized Decriminalize Nature Oakland, which passed the initiative for plant medicines to be non-adjudicated in the city of Oakland. They spoke. They were wonderful. So what a mix that was. We have variety in this program. Mary just got done talking about competencies and integration, and Maria Mangini is right now speaking about the history of psychedelics from the 50s till now.
Janis, we're still seeing happy. Is that what you want us to be seeing on the screen?
Oh no, really?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it at all. I erased it.
It's okay, Janis. Can you unshare your screen and then share it again?
Sure.
Awesome.
Oh, Anne, thank you for that intelligence. Okay, so, well, I just walked you through it. I don't want to take more time to show it to you. I was pointing out what was on our agenda for you. So we're going to go forward here, and I'll show you the slide deck with some information for you.
We can see your presentation, Janis.
Yep, now we see it. It's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I gave you the cast of characters who were teaching this weekend without much ado in showing you what the big picture is. So here's the big picture. So this is a disclosure. I have no potential conflicts or actual conflicts of interest, and this presentation discusses legal FDA approved uses. And I give this to you because we've been needing training of therapists since 1952, 1949. It did happen to some degree, as Bill was describing, up through the Controlled Substances Act in 1970, but there weren't that many of us around at that point who were getting trained. I come from a place where I'm old enough to have been able to avail myself of all kinds of psychedelic experiences, both in a safe set and setting and more recreationally when I was quite young. So I come from the privilege of having had that available to me. I also come from privilege in having been able to go down to Peru and train with shamans in ayahuasca healing methodologies and ceremonies. So I sit here with you having created this program in large part with consultation with Bill and Bob Jesse and several other researchers from NYU, Charlie Grobe from UCLA, and some of the old timers who are older than me who taught me my stuff back in the 70s. So I came forward and printed up and published this article that you see here on the left, published under the co-editorship of Charlie Grobe and Tony Bosses, who put out 2 volumes. I recommend this highly. The Journal of Humanistic Psychology had 2 volumes specifically to psychedelics. They're about 12 to 15 articles in both of those issues. And then I've published a chapter based on these ideas in Michael Winkelman and Ben Sess's work. And this is where my background is coming from. So the learning objectives we have for this program is to know about research design, the science of psychedelics, neuroscience, pharmacology, understanding skills and competencies you need for this particular kind of psychotherapy, as well as structural competencies, or what has been called in the past cultural competencies. And to understand about appropriate set and setting, which you all have been studying together for a while. I don't think you'll be surprised by many of the professions on this list. I worked very closely with people in Hefter, which I'm now on the board of and honored for that. And predating USONA, it was MAPS. We looked at the likelihood that these kinds of professionals would be included and approved by the FDA. A couple of these professions, we don't know quite yet if they can be lead therapists, but they for sure would be able to be the secondary facilitator. They all understand this, unlike the naive couple here. They all understand the nature of that interesting opportunity. And there's 12 domains to our training. And I've published this in the chapter and in that article. This is what I recommend all training programs have in aspects of their programs. Studying the history and the legal status, of course, neurobiology, neuropharm, drug disposition and drug interactions, best practices in set and setting, including everything Bill was talking about so eloquently, preparation, the session, and integration. Understanding of transference, boundaries, ethics, and self-care, a very important topic area. Being given supervised observation of psychedelic session videos. We don't have as many of psilocybin videos as we would like. MAPS has created a wonderful panoply and variety of videos that we are able to watch along with Michael and Annie Midhofer and Shannon Carlin. And then sixth, we talk about both client-centered types of psychedelic therapy as well as psycholytic. I think you've had Jeff Gus with you talking about the analyst's history of using psycholytic therapy, which is low-dose psychedelic therapy in vivo in the session. And then seventh, all kinds of complementary therapeutic techniques, from somatic-based interventions to internal family systems, to Gestalt, to guided imagery, etc. A clinician needs a toolbox of various types of techniques to use depending upon the client and the time in the treatment of the client, what's appropriate. We also talk about being a co-therapist and how to build yourself into a team as part of a dyad, and interprofessional skills for working on what no doubt will be multidisciplinary teams of the future and currently. We also talk about consciousness, transpersonal intelligence, mystical experiences, which Ron very rightly tipped his hat to Bill about being one of the more elegant and apprised people of that area in number 9 in our whole field. So 10 is looking at ceremonial use. We talk about that abstractly. We've had Dennis McKenna come in and speak to that for us. And we are aspiring to this. We can't do this right now because we don't have a study operating and no one's rescheduled any of the psychedelics for us yet. So we can't do 11 in our program, nor can anyone unless they're running a study at their research center. And then 12, I'm a big proponent of everyone who's going to be doing this work have their own experience of being guided in an FDA-approved study. So this is the heart of the training program and the foci that we have. The philosophical background that I come from, I'm a philosophically oriented clinical psychologist. Really recommend to you, most of you no doubt have these on your bookshelves, but Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception from 1962. Wax is very existential and philosophical about his experiences with mescaline and psilocybin and other psychedelics. And Alan Watts, the Buddhist scholar, speaking about his experiences with psychedelics, and famously in this book, Joyous Cosmology, speaks about once you've gotten the message, hang up the phone. At one point, he ceased doing psychedelics and continued with his Buddhist practices, but he was an advocate for this. I share this with you because it's an interesting way to look at where we go when we're on a psychedelic. It can feel like we're in a cauldron, but a very expansive cauldron. And the training we do, we've already talked about this. This is a review. The two things I haven't mentioned, though, are in vivo instruction. We do a lot of role playing, and we have mentors in our program who oversee the students' individualized professional development, where they go and get auxiliary training to support their work. And I highly recommend these two documents. Bill's a co-author of the one on the left, Safety in Hallucinogen Research from 2008. It's still a classic, authored with Matt Johnson and Roland Griffiths. And Ralph Metzner's Allies of Awakening, speaking about proper dosage level. Ralph took a big risk in printing up this book. He wanted people to know that he was negating what he and Leary had said about dosage levels back in the Harvard heyday, where they were recommending very high dosage levels of materials such as LSD, and he wanted to correct the record. There's a lot of good information in both of these documents here. A little bit about mentoring. Several of you on this call are mentors. I counted there's about 30 people from CIS here, and Bill and Ann being two of them. They work for 8 hours in consultation with an individual mentee, a student in the program. We have both formative and summative evaluations, where students are assessed at the interview. Their progress is assessed twice, and both the mentors and trainees do program evals. Students write monthly papers and a final paper about their learning or a publishable article. And we all hold this. I model this. I've had this since I was a clinical psychologist at the University of Connecticut. This is our state right now. There's so many questions we have not been able to answer. We're strapped for money, as all of you know, for our research. I like this slide a lot. It's a hallmark for me. And we've talked about these. I have to go pretty quickly through these because I'm running out of time. I'd like to leave time for you to ask questions. You all know about empathy if you're a therapist. This is a presence that I suggest needs to be abiding and constant throughout the work. We need to enhance the person's ability to trust their own process, as well as make ourselves as trustworthy as possible and check in about that, because a therapeutic alliance is so important. I think everyone who becomes a therapist in this realm should be a friend to the transpersonal fields and consciousness and not be uncomfortable with mystical states. So I look for people to have those capacities and qualities and dispositions toward it. They need to know about the knowledge of the physical and psychological effects. They need deep self-awareness and very high levels of ethical integrity to be working with people while they're altered. And as I said earlier, proficiency in complementary techniques. This is a sampling from our first 4 years. You can see about 100 are MDs, NDs, and clinical psychologists. Another 100 are MFTs, LCPPs, and nurses and social workers. And then we've had a few clergy and TCM docs, as well as physical therapists. These are older folks. Their average license since a number of years since licensure has been an average of 15 years. Average age 41. 1 out of 4.5 in the past 4 years has identified as a person of color. This year we have 1 out of 3 is identified as a person of color. and a fair number of LGBTQI folks as well. All of them understand this. You should never engage in unsupervised introspection. We've all had this happen. It's even more important during psychedelic sessions and their aftermath when we're doing our integration. I think I might skip over this, not knowing how much you've been speaking about REMS yet. I'll just say a little bit. This is my personal prediction of what the risk evaluation and mitigation strategies will be after the FDA reschedules psilocybin and MDMA. It looks like they'll be in designated clinics with certified clinicians in dyads. A licensed clinician will be the lead in the dyad, and the facilitator, the second facilitator, would be someone with a mental health or clinical BA or MS or above. New models of delivery will be helpful and necessary, and there'll be room for it. Groups, more integration therapy, psycholytic work, family assessment. This will probably not be one of them, given we don't have data on it and the FDA isn't looking at this at all right now, although Greg is. He got a bum deal in my regard. So here's where we're going. We want to expand this training program across the country, and guess where our first site, I hope, will be? It's in your neck of the woods in Boston, mostly because of you all and our friends who are your fearless leaders in the salon, in the research group. We're also looking to license our curricular material to other universities. We've just written a grant, and we found that if we were to give 80 hours of our curricular material and attending references and whatnot, other universities, if we were able to do it with 5 a year in the first 3 years of this, those universities, if they let in 50 to 70 people, which is what we do, they'd be able to train another couple thousand on top of the couple thousand we'd like to train. We need thousands of therapists. And we would like to have our students do psilocybin and MDMA facilitation for each other. We're looking for funding for that study right now. And we're thinking of doing risk mitigation programs for the public, particularly with the advent of the decrim movements. And I'm holding dear this idea that we really don't know that much about consciousness. We have intimations, and we have awe and wonder, and sometimes sheer dread. But I like holding that we really don't know enough yet about what's happening in the brain or the heart or the body. And I'm just fine with that. I'm a celebrator of ambiguity. And I'm a celebrator of what is called statistically error. It's such a misnomer. It's what we don't understand yet, and we call it error. How human is that? So I'd rather call it knowledge that we haven't received yet. So thank you very much for having me with you.
Beautiful, Janis. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So again, people are not typing questions in the chat room, but I assume people have questions. So
yeah, I have a question.
Hi, Mark.
First of all, I'm just so grateful to be on a call with both you and Bill, and this question is for both of you. Seeing ketamine is a legal psychedelic, I'm curious about opportunities that would align with the priorities of the FDA approval and unscheduling or rescheduling. And I'm also curious how, as part of what we're doing today, could we set the stage for spiritually oriented therapy for people in the future?
So, Mark, I think maybe the beginning of the question is that you are wondering, you want to brainstorm together about the place of ketamine, both in clinical work as well as in training. Is that right? Vis-a-vis psychedelic, the classic psychedelics?
Exactly.
Okay. A lot of folks are starting clinics without having gotten much training in psychedelics at all, starting out working with ketamine and in various platforms of intervention, as you all are probably well schooled in the variety of what's being done with ketamine right now. We offer an option for our students to get training in ketamine and encourage them to consider using ketamine in the intervening time. We're very honest with our students from the get-go. Everything on our website says there's nothing you can do right now except try to get into an FDA study after graduation, do integration with clients that you have at your hospital or community clinic or in your private practice, or with the advent of expanded access, if there's a large enough N for people to have sufficient clients to work with, which is not the case right now. MAPS has only received an N of 50 so far. Hopefully they'll get that many hundreds of times over in the next few years. So mostly our students are sitting around and doing this and waiting for when they can jump in. Many are wanting to start salons like this, and we're going to hire your team to teach our grads how to do what you've so ably managed to create. This is quite impressive what you have here. So I don't know if I quite answered that question, Mark, but I'd be curious if you have an idea that you wanted to share.
That's
Sure.
you, Mark.
Or you, I'm glad to answer. And I would invite your comments. Well, because it is legal, and if there is a safe setting for doing, especially group work, with a well-organized model for specific issues, whether it's supporting cancer patients, or because ketamine has some evidence with other issues, it could be organized around other issues. Perhaps it could be the basis for offering treatment in a clinical setting and collecting research data at the same time. And or could it be of value in training clinicians and getting that experience with psychedelics? And I guess the third question in the back of my mind is, with V codes, is there any way to actually support people who may have spiritually related growth goals? So I'm just brainstorming widely, but I wanted to throw that out there for your consideration.
Well, I suspect David Lukoff, who was the creator and the plower of the field to get the V code for religious issues, would be a celebrant of your idea of this. Many of the new specializations in clinical psychology have made ample use of V codes, so I think that's a very interesting idea, Dr. Bates. Yeah, thank you for that question and comment.
We have a couple of questions here, Janis, about you mentioning that you might be coming to Boston. So maybe to this crowd, you can tell us a little bit more about that.
What we would love to do is hypnotize Anne or clone her somehow so she has more time, or utilize some help from those of you who are teachers. I'm thinking of you, Ron and Chris, who were with us Friday and Saturday. Good to see you here. And Yvonne. Any number of you who would feel comfortable leading the way. We would put our curriculum available to people in Boston so that students wouldn't need to travel to California if they're on the eastern half of the country. We duplicate what we're doing here in the 180-hour curriculum, although all bets are off with COVID-19 and whether we ultimately will need to do more online in the next couple years. But we would like to have a brick and mortar place in Boston so our trainees on the East Coast and in the South and in the Midwest can choose where they'd like to fly to. I'm also here to petition if anyone is from an open-minded department in any university represented on this call, and your chancellors and provosts and deans would not do what that first gentleman did to Bill when he came back with his report of his work with Hans Karl. We would love to gift you very inexpensively 80-ish hours of a core curriculum of everything I've spoken about here and help you get started. We're wanting to pollinate other programs. We'll be desperate for trained people who can do public education of risk reduction as well as clinical work.
Yeah, I would just stress that if this field now finally takes off, as it looks like it might, in oncology centers, in palliative care, in treatment of addictions, and perhaps eventually treatment of depression, that alone is going to make for a demand for countless skilled therapists. And we want to have people jump into those positions who are competent and knowledgeable and wise, so we don't destroy what we've created through ineptness of one kind or another. I think it's real. I remember back in Spring Grove days, we thought this was going to happen in a few years, and we sat around the conference table musing about how we were going to train everyone. Well, it fizzled out, and we never had to train the hordes. But I think this time it just might take off.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got Janis on board here.
Well, you've been Johnny Appleseed helping numerous training programs get started, dear Dr. Richards. So thank you for that. It's coming back at you. You're no longer the last person standing in that lab office. It's exactly true. It not just in palliative care, but in addiction care. All of our subspecialties in psychology and psychiatry would benefit from this. And I feel like we are not doing the public a service by pushing to have these medicines rescheduled without having a safety net for people who could have untoward experiences if they weren't with a skilled team. So I'm also part of a credentialing board creation with representatives from Hefter, USONA, MAPS, and CIS, with some advisement from Compass and several leads of the 2 APAs giving us consultation. We'd like to see a baseline credentialing be set for the licensed lead person in the dyad and for the person who could have a BA or MA and not necessarily licensed, which is what the FDA appears to be allowing going forward. Right now, we don't know. But I think once we establish that, then all kinds of training programs could get jump started and they could meet those criteria, and it will not be a crazy situation, which it could become if we don't set up some structure.
You know, a parallel I like to refer to as Cicely Saunders' work in hospice, you know, where a few decades ago there was one woman who had this idea called hospice, you know, and now, you know, there's hospice providers, there's associations, there's annual conferences, there's certification, on and on, insurance coverage, and I think the same thing will happen with psychedelics.
Because I'm like, wait, I should get that, and then it's too late.
But I think the takeaway is that this is a rapidly evolving, very in-depth movement.
Yes.
And I don't know if you noticed that every person on this call has white hair. I mean, these are mature clinicians.
Yes, but that's...
Somebody is not on mute right now, but it is incredible to hear this conversation.
Okay, Mackenzie.
We're all most of the people are older than me.
Who's Prudy?
And
this thing about white hair, some of us don't have any hair.
Hold on. There's a group of people being represented here, and I'm so grateful for you.
Well, I'm really glad you younger folk are here. There's not enough diversity among us, as I can see. That's a condemnation of our field. It's just the case. But I like to talk about passing on the knowledge to the next generation. And that's what we're about as quickly as we can. We're not getting any younger. We've been doing it for decades in whatever ways we've been doing it. If we don't get that info to you, you're going to have to just go through it and make it up as you go along, which is what we did basically. But we'd love to save you some effort, and we don't want blowback for those of you who are younger. So this is blowback protection. This is safe set and setting for our next young Turks and Turkettes who are going to be the clinical supervisors of the future and the people doing talks like this. So I celebrate you all. There's not enough of you yet, as a matter of fact. But you're coming. You're there.
Great.
Sandeep.
Hi, Janis.
Hi there. Hi.
Thank you for all your wonderful work. I think you're the most practical, realistic work going on right now is training next generation of therapists. I'm about to launch a study that will use flotation tanks, and the participants will be mental and medical health professionals. And one of the hypotheses and question I have for you relates to the well-being of the therapists. One of the elephant in the room dialogues in the mental health community is vicarious trauma, is people who are working with people who are suffering day in, day out. Is there anything you're seeing within the psychedelic research world and in your training program that speaks to the well-being of the therapists? Is it perhaps, my just suspicion is that this may be something that can increase the resiliency of therapists everywhere as well.
The flotation tank specifically?
No, the psychedelic therapy.
Oh, yes. Yeah. You give to the healer that which heals their clients. So for self-care, there's a lot of burnout of a very particular kind among psychedelic researchers and therapists. They're always looking for more money. They don't get paid well. They're doing often selfless service and getting unpaid to run their participants on weekends. Their schedules are nailed down by the protocol in a very draconian, rightly so way, because it's part of the protocol. These people, to me, are saints by having done this for decades. Yes, they get some accolades, but not huge out in the mainstream. They get accolades from us in the psychedelic field, but they often put at risk their work. I was really nervous taking this job, like, okay, well, I'm a full professor, I can take my lumps if need be, but it's not an easy row to hoe. So I think any possibilities of our replenishing ourselves, going within, helping our bodies to alleviate the burnout that's here will be very, very helpful. And thank you for bringing that up, because we didn't talk enough about that. And it's good to see you.
That's a major theme in the CIIS program too, really, of self-care and doing whatever you got to love yourself as much as you love other people, and you gotta take good care of yourself. You really do. And there is burnout prevention, but whatever it takes, we got to care well for ourselves.
Both Bill and I have something in common. We get out of the house when we can and go out into our yards and just muse and try to become rather thoughtless and just take in the sensations of being outdoors and reconnect with the ground and the air and the sunshine or the rain or the flowers, the trees, the animals that live all around us. For me, that's essential, and not everyone can have that. So I feel very, very grateful. It's a privilege for me to be out in the woods. And I've always lived in the woods. Thank goodness. I don't think I could have, I'm sitting here surrounded by about 200 redwood trees and about 60 hummingbirds outside at feeders I have. It inspires me. And without that, I think I would die on the vine. So I don't know what that is, but I think it's a really human thing to want to be close to nature. So that's my best bet. I love to dance, and I also like to hike, and I do a little bit of art here and there, but I've been really busy with this program, and I can't wait until I get a call from one of you professors saying, hey, my dean would be open to this. I'd like to get 80 hours of your training program and start it here in my department. Call me.
Great. So we've beautifully morphed into having both Janis and Bill.
It's been great.
Of course. Here's a question. How can training be made financially accessible for people from diverse socioeconomic circumstances? I know it's something you both have thought a lot about.
Great question. It's my primary fundraising task to bring in as many scholarships as we can. We're hoping we have a big 3-year plan in a proposal for funding set, and our proposal is that students get at least half of their tuition paid for. We're looking at cutting the number of in-person weekends in order to save the cost of flying teachers in and doing more of it online. Unfortunately, that cuts some of the quality. I'm a clinical psychologist. I know we have to be in the room with people while we're training them. So we're looking at ways to cut the costs as well as to get funding. It's really important. We need to diversify the whole field, and I'm thrilled that we have so many people identified as persons of color in our program this year.
What is the current cost, Janis?
It's $10,000.
Regardless of your degree.
Right, right.
Right. Another question, what are your suggestions for the younger generation to get involved in the trainings, education, practice, especially those who are still in school or at the beginning of their practice?
Well, first off, I would recommend they keep their membership in your research group so they can have experiences like this. There are so many conferences now that are posting speakers like Bill and myself and other speakers that you've had in previous months here at BPRG. I would say make a friend with YouTube and go watch conference presentations that have been uploaded for free. You can learn so much by doing that. Often you can do a screenshot if you just pause that film and take a screenshot of a slide that has references on it, and then go to your public library and get help from the librarian. Get yourself a copy of that article from the American Medical Association or the APA's journals, and you can start reading and teaching yourself. That's what I would do if you're a sophomore in college. And go into some kind of program that allows you to get some counseling skills, even if it's not psychology. It might be something in education. It might be specialization in nursing. Get some counseling experience, because that would enable you to become a second facilitator, at least now in the way the FDA is speaking about it. I can also send your group our textbooks that we both require for the program, one of which is Bill's and Jeremy Narby's book that Bill mentioned, The Cosmic Serpent. Those are required, and Ralph's book, Allies of Awakening. I also have a list of 20 recommended textbooks. You can get used ones very cheap over the Amazon or internet, whichever big box, gargantuan you can tolerate the most. But I'll send that to Anne if you all would like to have that.
Terrific, thank you. Someone's wondering if an SC, I assume somatic experiencing practitioner certificate, if that's enough to qualify for your training, Janis.
Right now, no, because we have for the clergy as well as for all our therapists, everyone needs to have a master's degree at least. But we've been wondering when to start a more basic program that might cost $3,000 to $5,000 for people who aren't on a licensed track, but who have a background. So you ye old or young somatic experiencing practitioner, you would be a fine candidate for a non-clinical certificate program of the future, and I'm sure they'll be coming as soon as possible, I hope. So hang in there and keep getting your training. Somatic experiencing is a very powerful application to this work.
And here's a question for both of you. Joe is currently in divinity school on a path to be an ordained chaplain, and he'd like to hear more about the breakdown of the traditions of the 5 clergy. If you've noticed anything unique in what they brought to the training, and if you have any ideas, you have to grow this, on how to grow this number, I think.
And what's the name of this person?
Joe Welker.
Joe, great question. I want to talk to you if you could answer your own question. We've been so busy with the training and all the panoply of cultural variables happening, changing month by month, that I haven't been able to reach out to the clergy and the chaplains in a significant way. I've been told there are some national groups that are clearinghouses for advertising for programs like this, if you will, but we haven't had time to reach out. So your other part of the question was difference among the 5. Not surprising, we had a Unitarian Universalist minister with us. We had an Episcopalian. We've had 2 rabbis. And I can't remember the denominations of the other 2. We have not had a sheikh or a Buddhist, a transmitted to Buddhist clinician teacher come in, but we are open to that. We look for world religion representation and a mainstream certification by the chaplain and clergy. We have had a couple chaplains, that's what it is. We've had interfaith chaplains come.
And
one of my dreams, as many of you know, is to see psychedelic education, if you will, integrated into seminary education, so that you could take a course with credit on a weekend and receive a psychedelic under ideal circumstances someday, and learn a bit about the domain of religious experience through experience, as opposed to just reading about it in the library.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be high quality education. We're not there yet, but we've done a study at Hopkins and NYU with clergy from different world religions that still will not be published for another year and a half because of follow-up, but it looks very promising. Yeah.
There's a quote that Tony Bossis has shared, and I mentioned Tony because Tony and Bill single-handedly convinced me to let clergy in, even though I was skeptical at the time because end-of-life studies were starting to wind down. And I'm so glad I did. Here's a quote from a rabbi that Tony worked with in mid-session. "Oh my God, this is what we've been talking about. Oh my God." So, clergy, come.
That's great.
that about says it all.
Great.
Oh, Janis, you're a prize.
Hi, Shippen. How you doing?
Janis, so wonderful to have you here.
So here's a question, I think, to both of you too, from my partner in MAPS, Mike Alpert. Can you please explain what you mean by the psycholytic therapy for integration?
Sure. Bill, do you want to talk about it from your experience, and then I will?
Historically, psycholytic is the word, right?
Mm-hmm.
Psycholytic therapy was the low dose administration of psychedelic substances in the context of generally psychoanalytic style psychotherapy that back in the 60s was used a lot in Europe, where a person might receive a psychedelic 3, even 4 times a week and kind of be left alone to experience and then write up a report. But it was felt like it accelerated psychotherapy, but it was generally within the realm of the ego. The dosage was kept low, but it was very helpful for many people. And there's a lot of case studies that were published back there, especially by people in Europe, of the value of psychedelics in just speeding up therapy. So that psycholytic therapy, historically, it's generally work in the ego as opposed to the psychedelic that came to be defined as the higher dose work, where you access the transcendental states of mind. Clearly, the ultimate goal is the integration of the two, the application of insights from both experiences and the interconnection between them. What does the enlightened man do? He chops wood and carries water, right?
Other interesting applications I've seen are having the person come in and take the low dose mescaline or psilocybin, LSD, whatever it might be, and be in your office, and they will have beta tested proper dosage for them to track what they're feeling, for you, the clinician, and often a psychoanalyst, to ask you to speak to familial attachments or whatever the issues are that you've been working on lately, with the idea that that medicine at low dose enhances the person's capacity to witness what they're feeling and have access to it. And they're more likely to share with the clinician. This is a very good goal of the clinician, that the clinician can hear more truthfully what's going on with that person. Not unlike what we see with MDMA therapy, where people are able to speak to the researchers and accurately say what is happening at that moment, and they're able to navigate around that material and consciousness quite well, depending on the part of the session that they're in. So I foresee, if things go well, that this kind of therapy will be experimented with by clinicians to see if it does enhance their more in-depth psychodynamic work, let alone somatic-based therapists who might like to see people get more in touch with their soma, what's happening with the body. It's an exciting time. Bill, did you ever try that out yourself back in the day when you could have? With any of your clients?
We had, well, both in Germany and in Baltimore, studies comparing high dose and low dose. And those who received low doses of DPT or LSD typically manifested, progress, but generally not as dramatically as those who were able to access the transcendental experiences with higher dosage. Mm-hmm. But they're both valuable realms.
Yeah. Thank you. Here's a question about the low number of clinical social workers in the program. Is that a reflection of the direction of the field? And someone else wondered, does the lead therapist have to be an MD or not?
The first question, I thought we had a bunch of
social workers.
I have to look at my own cheat sheet here. We had 35 social workers, and 25 nurses, 50 marriage and family therapists, 38 clinical psychologists. I think we have a good spread of those types of clinicians. So it was 35 social workers, 25 nurses, 50 marriage and family therapists, and 38 clinical psychologists. No, the social workers definitely are going to have a place and do in this work. Mm-hmm. I fear that something may happen here, that this will be very much based on selfless service. All of us, as it opens up, you need to keep your day job, whether you're a social worker or a doctor. And the question about the lead facilitator, I'll fill you in what I know about this. I've been active with Rick Doblin, who may be on the call now and can tell you more. We're trying to successfully, because it affects me and my trainees intimately. It affects everybody. What's happening right now with the FDA having required USONA and Compass in their latest appeals for approval of studies to ask them to utilize only an MD or a doctorate level clinical psychologist as a lead. lots of things wrong with that. And on the other hand, in some studies, they've allowed the second facilitator to only have a BA and be unlicensed. So on the one hand, paradoxically, they made it more flexible, and on the other hand, they made it more restrictive. So we're hoping to fight the good fight, and I'm waiting to see what happens with MAPS, because I don't want to be required to do that either if we can get funding for our training study for our trainees to sit with one another having MDMA and psilocybin. It's just plain wrong. It's plain wrong. So that's my humble opinion. It's not so humble, actually.
And it's right. Judith is asking where the discussion stands around malpractice coverage for this field. People talking about this?
Judith, could you say a little bit more? You could pop in and turn your audio on if you want.
Sure. I'm a psychiatrist, and I live in a place where there's no support for this at the moment. That might change. And I was thinking, if I ever do get to be part of a team, I don't think that this kind of work would be covered by any kind of psychiatric malpractice, but I've never heard anybody discuss this. Has anyone discussed it?
Sure. The research teams all have taken out the liability insurance for their clinics, but no one has done it yet for personal need in a private practice. I would not be the right person to answer this, but I assume the ketamine practitioners are covered by their insurance or they've gotten a rider, but I don't know the answer to that particular question. But it's a good one. We have liability here in decrim areas where you and I can't teach people how to do their plant medicine they're legally growing in their backyard safely, because you and I would be looking like we're aiding and abetting them doing something illegal from a federal or state point of view. So we have one hand tied behind our back in that way. However, we can teach them about safety, but from what I know, we have to document it very carefully. If we do integration work with anyone who went and had some kind of psychedelic with someone else and you never want to know who that was they had it with, you need to document that you told that client about all the hazards and the problems with psychedelics before you had the conversation with them about how to, darn, you did a psychedelic. Well, I guess since you did that, I can help you integrate it. But remember, I warned you this could be bad for you. Okay, tell me the juicy thing that happened to you on that ayahuasca journey. We're having to live in a very hypocritical place here around this. Hypocrisy is maybe a too strong a word. Complicit is better. So I wish you patience. We'll all have to figure this out together.
Okay, thanks.
Here's what seems like a follow-up question from Candida. Can you give us guidelines on the documentation on safety and integration?
Hi, Candida. Bill, do you want to take this on? I'm not sure where Candida's going with this.
I guess it's always wise to have good clinical notes and all that in case you're ever audited. But I don't know what more I can say about that. I don't think we need to be terribly defensive. And this is, when you think of the medical procedures that go on all the time with giving drugs that cause cancer, that have huge negative effects. There's all kinds of medical procedures that are incredibly risky. And this really is a very safe one when it's done by trained people in a responsible way. And I think we're on pretty level ground here if we have practitioners who are well trained.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Janis, I'm going to come in. This is Candida. Hello.
Oh, hi there. How are you, Candida?
Good to see you. So good to see you. when you were speaking earlier, you said, well, you have to carefully document. And I thought, well, okay, but what are you saying there?
Oh, just what I had said. It's pretty simple that you warned your client about the harms of psychedelics and the history of it. Maybe you could have an article such as the Matt Johnson, Bill Richards, and Roland Griffiths article to share with them about there's definitely safety issues, and you just document that you gave them that knowledge.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's a way to show that you weren't aiding and abetting them doing an illegal and risky activity that their family members could later blame you for. Good to see you.
So here's a question from Raman. Do you recommend any teaching modules for giving an overview of psychedelic work to students in clinical psych, social work, medical school, and similar programs? This might be a lecture or part of a lecture so that students are aware that this work exists.
Good. Bill, let's brainstorm about this. What was the highest level conference lately? That one in Amsterdam 2 years ago had some good material in it. There's some good material at Breaking Conventions in the UK. They meet every other year.
Yeah,
what other has higher level?
YouTube is full of good presentations. You know, like if you just wanted to do an introduction in a college course, or to show a film like Robert Barnhart's New Understanding. It certainly legitimizes it, provides basic information without proselytizing, you know?
Yeah. I think in addition to that, if I were in your shoes, I'd go look at the CIS website and see who their teachers are and find freely available conference talks by those people. And also look at the MAPS website for who their trainers are. I don't think USONA specifically puts up their trainers bill, do they? But they might, and Compass might. Yeah, I would sniff around those 4 entities and see, and Hefter, also 5 entities in the English speaking world, and see who's doing teaching, and then find their videos and cobble something together. And then in about 6 months, call me and see what CIS has put together that you could take as a franchise and jumpstart it with anywhere from 20 to 80 hours of high level, very high level training tapes.
And Horizons has good tapes, right? The Horizons conference.
I didn't know they did. Yes. Okay, good. Good.
Which happens every year in October in New York. So we're getting to the end of our time. Thank you. Any last words of wisdom, either of you? It's been wonderful. As Courtney just said, it feels like we're sitting in our living room. How wonderful. Thank you, Courtney.
I like that.
Wonderful sense of community here, you know, even though we're spread all over on 2 continents, you know?
Yeah.
It's great.
Yes.
Very much so. And I appreciate how you have grown by leaps and bounds as a group. And I would hazard to guess it's because you've kept high level standards about what you'll talk about together and what your mission is. And you've made big steps in building community. And I'm so unhappy I missed the time to come to Ron and Georgie so I could have those great meals with you in a more intimate setting. But now that you've grown, you're not at 5,000 yet, I will be really happy to come visit you when I'm on the East Coast again. I have family up and down the East Coast. I'll come see you all. I'll come to one of your meetings, and I'd love to meet you in person.
Well, you're granted an eternal rain check. So,
okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, deal. I want to meet your puppy.
Yeah.
There it
Well,
is.
you're welcome, meeting or no meeting. You're always welcome.
For sure.
Great. I wanted to jump in and say thank you for inviting My name's Dana, and I was part of the CIIS cohort last year. And just thank you to everyone who opened this up to us. It's been a real joy to attend. Just wanted to relay my thanks.
Thank you, Dana. I think it's really important in this new time to make a list of the positive things that are coming out of it, and certainly being able to invite people like Dana have been wonderful. One of my positive things I said in the beginning before many of you are on is I'm barefoot right now, and it doesn't matter what I have on beneath my waist.
Absolutely. I'd love to give an offering of a quote in ending here, and then I'll have to pop up and go back to my other Zoom call with the students in my course. I'd like to do an offering from Josiah Royce, a leader in civil rights and truth-telling movements. Royce said, "When one cannot find the beloved community, we need to take steps to create it, and that if there is no evidence of its existence, then we must live by and act as if it is so, and act as so to hasten its coming. When there's a lack of evidence of beloved, loving community around us, we must act as if our contributions in the moment will hasten its coming." I love that idea, and I wanted to share that. May we all be progenitors of beloved community in the weeks to come while we're sheltered in place, and after we get out of Dodge and we can be about to remember how important building community is. Representative community.
Yeah. Thank you, Janice. You're a light leading us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Ditto. Love you.